What is up, guys? It is Jacob from QuadHunting, and today we are going to be looking at the Lions as a whole, how they did this season, and I'm going to be going over each individual player that recorded at least one stat, and I'm going to give them a season grade on the whole season and tell you and just my thoughts on how they played this season. So overall, Lions went 9-7, as I've said before in multiple videos. It's a winning record. It wasn't good enough to get in the playoffs this year, and that ultimately led to Jim Caldwell, our coach, being fired. So we're going to go into the grading now, and we're going to start off with the most important position, quarterback. And we're going to start with Matthew Stafford, of course, because there's only two quarterbacks that played any snaps for the Lions this year. Coming in for Stafford, he had played all 16 games, started all 16, through 565 attempts for 371 completions, throwing for, it was a career high 65.7% completion rate, I believe. I don't have his career numbers, but he threw 4,446 yards, 29 touchdowns, really low, and I'm also pretty positive this is a career low, 10 interceptions, for an overall rating of 99.3. That is not the ESPN rating. I don't know how they mathematically put that one out there, but he was also sacked 47 times, and he had 4 game-winning drives this season. So I'm gonna give Stafford an A-. That's about where I thought his stats were gonna go this season. All these grades are based off of my expectations for them this season. So I pretty much expected Stafford's stats to be actually a little lower than this. I had him sitting, I thought his completion percentage would be around where it is. The yards, I think, is almost a little lower. I thought that maybe that'd be like 4,700. Touchdowns are about where I thought they were going to be, and interceptions are actually lower than what I thought it was going to be as well. He's got a career high in QB rating this year, so I'm giving it to Stafford. That was a good year, A- for him. A would have just been maybe single-digit interceptions with maybe 30 touchdowns. I know that's like kind of nitpicking, but great year for Stafford. It was probably one of his best years of his career. Only one other quarterback got any snaps, and that was Jake Rudock. He played in 3 games, only threw in one of them, which was that Baltimore Ravens debacle. 3 completions on 5 attempts for 60%, 24 yards, no touchdowns, and an interception. His QB rating was a 32.5, and it's kind of unfair, my grade for him, because he did not have very much of a chance of getting a higher grade there. No other opportunities to throw the ball, but he comes in at a D. Honestly, I could have been a not complete or not applicable, an NA. So I'm gonna have to like that D for Rudock. When you come in, when your QB goes down for a little bit, you don't want to be throwing an interception in. And yes, it was the league's best defense, one of the league's best defenses at the time, but you're a professional quarterback. You shouldn't be making mistakes when you're called upon like that. So Stafford A-, Rudock a D. Moving on to the running game. We had 5 different running backs take rushing yards take a snap at running back this year and record at least one attempt. So I'm going to start off with the leading rusher, which was Ameer Abdullah. He had 165 attempts, 552 yards, 4 touchdowns, and averaged 3.3 yards a carry. He also was targeted. He also caught 25 passes for a touchdown. Don't have his yards. His total yards from scrimmage were 714. I am giving Abdullah a D+. I think I was, before the season started, when I was going over prediction for players, I thought Abdullah would be more of a, hopefully like a 700-yard rusher, 800-yard rusher, and maybe 6 touchdowns, and he definitely underperformed that. That yards in an attempt is really low, and you could put a lot of this on the offensive line for sure, but our running game, none of our running backs besides Tion Green have any kind of vision what to speak of, so that really hurt Abdullah this year, not being able to find the holes when they were there. A lot of times there weren't holes, but when they were there, he was just missing them. So D- or D+ for Abdullah. Moving on to Riddick, he had 286 yards, 3 touchdowns, 3.4, just a little bit better yards a carry for him, but he did have 53 receptions, 2 touchdowns, and a whole bunch of yards. I don't know why I didn't list that. He had almost 500, there's 400 and some receiving yards for 730 total yards from scrimmage. I gave him a C. for a while there he was running really well, and you thought maybe we had something with him in running, and then it kind of fell off. So I'm giving him a C there on the season. It's an average grade, and I believe that's kind of where it fits. He's a less than mediocre running back, a great pass catcher, so that kind of falls into he's an average weapon for a team. So Tion Green only got action these last couple weeks of the season. He had 165 yards, 2 touchdowns, 3.9, the best yards run. Kate went to Green. He had also 2 targets, 2 receptions, 0 receiving touchdowns for a total of 179 yards from scrimmage. I gave him a B- coming in as an undrafted free agent, and to be at least a little bit of a weapon at the end of the season was pretty valuable for him and for the team. So I think B-. I know a lot of fans had higher expectations for him. I did not have any expectations for him. I was not on the Tion Green bus throughout the season. I did not believe he should be starting over some of these other guys. And, he played all right. So I'm going to give him a B- on that. He played above my expectations. The last 2 guys, Dwayne Washington and Zach Zenner, I both gave Fs. Zenner had the 1 touchdown between the 2, but their yards of carry, 2.2, 1.9. And then 2 catches between them. That's just awful, especially when last year there were high hopes on Zenner. He very underperformed this year, and then Dwayne Washington dealt with some injuries and then just ultimately was sitting on the bench for the most part. So both those guys got Fs. The average grade for those running backs are not good at all, especially if you weigh in how many attempts into the grade. Tion Green's B- definitely keeps this up a little bit higher. Moving on to the wide receivers. There are ultimately some pretty good grades out of the wide receivers. Golden Tate had 92 catches for just over 1,000 yards, 5 touchdowns. Yards from scrimmage, he had 1,025 yards. He had a couple runs in there. I gave Golden Tate an A-. Definitely our number 1 receiver. The nice thing about our receiving core is that we have many weapons throughout it. So I gave Golden Tate a A-, and I feel pretty good about that. So moving on to Marvin Jones, he had 61 catches, which are a lot lower than Golden Tate, but he ended up with more yards because he had a ridiculous 18 yards a catch. He had 9 touchdowns, which was more than any Pro Bowl wide receiver had. I'm going to throw that out there. And then he did not add it anymore on the running game. I gave him a solid A. That is to do it. That yard a reception, number 18 yards of reception, is just insane. He's a deep threat, and he's really come out in this second season with the Lions. Kenny Galladay, he started 5 games, only played in 11. He had some injury issues. He only caught 28 balls for 477 yards. He averaged just a little bit lower than Marvin Jones' yards a catch, and that was 17. He had 3 touchdowns. I gave him, this would probably be the most controversial grade, I gave him a C+. I had expected a little more out of Kenny Galladay coming into the season as the 3rd receiver. I know a lot of that injury kind of hurt, and then he was kind of just looked out of place for a little bit there in the middle of the season. He came on strong in the first game, came on strong in the last game, so hopefully that's a sign of things to come, how we can see that. We can expect performances that we had in those 2 games throughout the whole season. Moving on to TJ Jones. He had 30 receptions for 399 yards, 1 touchdown. I was very happy with his play this year, especially because I didn't believe he'd make the roster. To produce and actually be a solid 4th receiver, those are solid numbers for number 4 receiver. I gave him a B-. Yes, I did grade him higher than Kenny Galladay because I had higher hopes for Kenny Galladay coming into the season, and I did not have very many high hopes for TJ Jones. So TJ Jones, B-. Moving on, we have one more wide receiver who I just gave a D because he had 3 receptions, 44 yards, no touchdowns, and that was Jared Aberdeus. He ended up actually getting cut in the middle of the season. He only played 7 games for the Lions, starting none. Moving to tight ends, I gave Eric Ebron on his 53 receptions, 574 yards, 4 touchdowns, a B-. Now, had I been doing this by halves, season cut in half, his beginning grade for the first half of the season would have been a D. Last half of the season would have been an A. He definitely came on very strong at the last half of the season, and I believed a B-, C+ range fit really well for Ebron to play through the animosity that all the fans were giving him. Very happy with how Ebron performed, and I will give him a B- on that. Michael Roberts, Our rookie tight end, I skipped over Darren Fells, but because I started Roberts, I'm going to finish it. 4 receptions, 46 yards. I gave him a D+. When you have a player like Eric Ebron struggling in the beginning of the season, you hope someone can step up, and that was where Michael Roberts could have excelled and done really well, and he ended up not getting. He was basically non-factor in every game when it came to being a receiving weapon. So D+, I believed he would have had a bigger impact on this season than he ended up having. Darren Fells had 17 receptions for 177 yards, 3 touchdowns, and I ended up giving him a B. When Ebron was struggling there in the beginning of the season, Fells was a pretty good target for Stafford, and then when Ebron getting back into his role, they moved Fells more into a blocking tight end situation, so you didn't really see him going out for passes much, and when he had just so many other options competing with him. So I gave Fells a B. Run blocking seemed to be pretty well this year, so this is definitely probably the best grade group besides secondary you'll see. Moving on to the offensive line. This one probably is going to be the worst besides the running backs. We're going to start off with Greg Robinson. Started 6 games for us and was awful. I give him an F. Brian Mahalik, I gave a B. When he stepped in, a lot of people thought couldn't get any worse, or it could get worse than Greg Robinson, and Mahalik showed that he could play a lot better and probably deserved to start more games than Greg Robinson did. Ultimately, he was a valuable player, so I gave him a B. Taylor Decker, I had higher expectations for coming back from his injury. He then towards the end of the season started to look better and better. Gave him a B-. Zach Curran, I gave non-complete because didn't see anything. Offensive line grading is not really my thing, but I just kind of went off of what I've heard from other fans say. Graham Glasgow, I gave a B-. He started the season off really rough, and then towards the end, when he made that switch back to center, he started looking a lot better, and I'm very hopeful for the future with Graham Glasgow as our center. Joe Dull, I gave a C+. To be coming in at the end there and starting games. He had a rough one the last game, but before that, he was playing pretty solid and making Lions fans believe we had our legit left guard. Probably have to fight out someone this offseason to become the starting left guard, but I'm pretty hopeful in Joe Dull's future as a Detroit Lion. Travis Swanson had a lot of injury issues this year, started 11 games. I gave him a C-. Even when he was healthy, he wasn't playing amazingly. TJ Lang started 13 games. I gave him a C+. I expected that right side of the line to be a lot better than it was. While he wasn't awful, my expectations were higher for him. Emmett Cleary, he had 7 games in 1 start, but I gave him a non-complete because I did not see any. Like I said, I don't really watch offensive line, so that's not my gig. And I didn't really hear his name come up too often with mistakes, so. Especially when that 1 star, that's where like Zach Curran didn't get any bad marks because I didn't remember hearing them say bad things about him or good things. So, and Mahalik had a great game one time he played and then had a decent game the next time, so I gave him a B there because I had heard that he was doing good. Don Barclay, I gave a D. When he came in, apparently he was awful. Ricky Wagner has played 14 games. I gave him a B. Again, I think he played better than Lang. He ended up still being a top 10 right tackle, so I think that's solid. Corey Robinson, I gave a C-. He played well in a couple games and then really bad in a couple others, so C- for Corey Robinson. That's all for offense. Now moving on to defense. Defense, actually, there's some really good grades mixed in with some really bad grades here, so we're going to start off. This is listed by amount of tackles, so I'm not going position by position. So Tahir Whitehead, I gave a B, 110 tackles. Definitely looked more close to form, better like he did a couple years ago. He had 4 fumble recoveries and also a sack and an interception. Moving on to Jared Davis, I gave a B-. I expected a little more out of him. He had a really rough patch there in the middle of the season, but towards the end, he was solid. In the beginning, he was also very solid. 96 total tackles, 2 sacks, forced fumble recovery, and an interception in the last game of the season. We have next Glover Quinn, who had 84 tackles, 4 forced fumbles, 1 fumble recovery, 3 interceptions, and 6 passes defended. I gave an A. He was probably the second most valuable person in our secondary, only behind next Darius Slay. 61 tackles, 8 interceptions, 1 fumble recovery, no sacks, and 26 passes defended. I gave Slay an A+. He is the only A+ recipient on this. Yep, in this whole grading system. Darius Slay, A+. Quandre Diggs, a little rough there in the beginning or to the middle of the season again. A lot of players have realizing that, but moving that switch over to safety seemed to do wonders for him. He had 54 tackles, 3 interceptions, all playing as the safety, 9 passes defended, and a sack. I give him a B+, especially to make that position switch in the middle of the season like that and to excel at it, and in fact probably make Tavon Wilson pretty expendable this offseason. It's really good for Quandre Diggs. Tavon Wilson, as I was just mentioning, 55 tackles, 2 sacks, 1 interception. I gave him a C. He got hurt in the middle of the season, which sucks to see anyone get hurt, but when he was playing decently. He wasn't playing amazingly. So, it is Ansah next. I went back and forth on how to grade Ansah. Like I said, had this been by halves, like with Ebron, it probably would have been a really poor grade and then been better at the end. So altogether, that came out to a C+, 44 tackles, and the quietest 12-sack season I can remember in history. He had 6 sacks in the last 2 games. Hopefully that's a sign of things to come if he stays healthy. Other than that, 1 fumble recovery and 1 forced fumble. Hopefully, if they do re-sign him, it's something cheap and more of a prove-it deal to see how he can respond to that. A'Shawn Robinson got a B-. He had a really quiet year. Not saying it was bad. He had 6 defended blocked passes, which is amazing as a defensive lineman. 1 interception as well, half a sack, and he only ended up having he had 53 tackles, only had half a sack. So B-. Hopefully we'll see some more pass rushing moves coming from him, and as he learns that better. Moving on to Anthony Zettel, 43 tackles. He got 6.5 sacks. I gave him a C. Nevin Lawson got a C. No interceptions. Probably could be even lower than that. I might even put him. Yeah, I might actually put him at a C-, D+. Very underperforming year, I think, for Lawson. You expect our corners to get interceptions. He didn't get his hands on any. DJ Hayden, I gave a D+. 2 fumble recoveries is pretty much the only thing holding his grade up. Akeem Spence, 3 sacks, 39 tackles, D+. Killebrew got a D. He looked great to begin the season and then just looked like he fell out of favor with coaching staff. 1 interception. I gave him a D. Paul Worlilow, never a big fan when Paul Worlilow was on the field. I gave him a D. I gave him an F. Jalen Reeves-Maben, didn't really hear much about him besides, he was kind of playing that Killebrew role from last year coming in on 3rd downs. Gave him a D. Just 25 tackles, half a sack. Forced fumble is not I guess that's actually kind of where I would have expected him to be in this offseason, but going with a D. Cornelius Washington, I gave an F. Basic reasons why Akeem Spence and Washington got bad grades is when you sign them and you sign these guys and expect them to be heavy parts of your rotation and then they still suck. That's where you get these bad grades. Tez Tabor gave a D. You expect your 2nd-round pick to play more games than he did. You could say we had a little more better. We had some decent corners to start the season, and then as they started to get worse, you saw Tabor come up. But you expect your 2nd-round pick to be able to outperform some of these lesser players. So Jeremiah Ledbetter, C-. Lodi Nagata, I gave a B when he was healthy. He was a really solid player for us. C for Charles Washington, a D for Valaga. C for Bellamore, and that's basically because he had that receiving touchdown. F for Thornton, Ringo, and Charles Johnson, and Jerquise Smith. And a C for Steve Longa. He was a pretty decent special teamer, so that's pretty much the only thing holding his grade up. Those last 4 guys were basically guys that didn't play much and just sucked when they did play. So, moving on to special teams, Matt Prater. A, he made 85% of his field goals and 97% of his extra points, only missing 1 extra point. He also punted 4 times, which is pretty awesome in that first game of the season, making some good moves. He was 7 of 11 for field goals over 50 yards, proving that he has a great leg. And then he was 8 of 10 for field goals over 40 yards, between 40 and 50 yards. So I will take those numbers all day, every day. Matt Prater quickly coming up into the Lions' best kicker conversation. I believe it's still Hansen, and then you could probably say Prater 2nd over Murray. Punting, I gave Sam Martin a B, Jeff Locke a B-, and Casey Redfern a non-complete. Martin got a little lower because he was one of the best punters before he got hurt, and then got outperformed actually by his replacement there for this season. If you look at the numbers, he averaged 43.4 yards a punt, where Locke averaged 45.3. So, I mean, they all were behind Casey Redfern because he only had the one 50-yard punt before he got hurt, and that is why Redfern gets a non-complete. He probably could have gotten an F because of his fumbling that snap and then trying to run and then getting hurt on it, but I decided to be a little nicer to him, give him a non-complete, because had that happened to Sam Martin, fans would have been a little more understanding about that, like had he mishandled a snap because he has chances to make up for it. Redfern never did, so non-complete for him. And then for returners, I'm only listing Jamal Agnew because he didn't have any defensive stats to mention there. So Jamal Agnew had 29 punt returns for 447 yards. The league high 15.4 yards a punt return. 2 touchdowns, which was also, I think, the best. Kick return, he was not nearly as good. He had 11 returns for 196 yards and for a 17.8 yards a return. Definitely not very good. He didn't take it out of the end zone very much. Didn't have very many opportunities to. Gave him a B. I believe he definitely has a place on this Lions team. He's definitely a weapon that the Lions need to continue to exploit and use. So those are my grades. I don't know what that all averages out to. I meant to do that, but forgot to. So it's kind of where you would expect a 9-7 team to be. You have some bright spots like our A's, Stafford, Tate, Jones, no offensive linemen, Glover Quinn, Darius Slay. I think we had 5 A's. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 A's, with that being Stafford, Tate, Jones, Quinn, Slay, and Prater. That's usually when you got those are kind of your leaders on the team. You've seen that, and they're probably the best players on the team, if I could say that. And then I'm gonna forget about some of the Fs that were guys who were not expected much of, but Dwayne Washington, Zach Zenner both getting Fs. Greg Robinson having to start that many games and still getting an F. And then Worley Lowe, Cornelius Washington. That's not good when you have, especially with Worley Lowe, Washington, Spence, them all getting low grades. Those were guys who were signed in the offseason and expected to be perform decently enough, and they weren't even able to do that. So I would probably call them busts, but they were signed to cheap deals, so it's not terrible busts. So that's what the grades come out to. Very, kind of, like I said, it's kind of where you'd expect a 9-7 team's grades to fall in line. If I were to give the offense as a whole grade, I would give them probably a B-. Defense as a whole, D+, C-, with Quinn, Diggs, and Slay definitely holding that grade up higher than it deserves to be. Special teams, I'd give a B+, A- on the whole season. Coaching staff wise, probably a D+, C- range. I'm just pulling those off the top of my head. So that's my grades for the Detroit Lions this season. There'll be more videos coming up. We'll go more in depth on the stats and that kind of stuff coming up. I'm also looking at the Lions roster, who I think will come back and who won't come back next year. So if you have any ideas for that video or any specific players you want me to talk about, I will do that in their own separate videos. The draft coming up eventually, April. It's still way out from here. If you have any guys that you want, any players coming out of college going into the draft that you want me to look at that you believe could be fits for the Lions, or you just are interested in in general, whether it be like a Baker Mayfield or a Shaquan Barkley. I really want Barkley, but I don't. He's never going to fall to the Lions. So if you got any guys like that who you don't even think will make it to the Lions, but you're still interested in, let me know. I will start doing videos on that. And yeah, so make sure you hit that like button down below, hit that subscribe button right next to it. Make sure you leave some comments about all the different things you want me to talk about coming up here, and I will see you guys all next time.